One of the most requested videos has been for old-fashioned banana pudding. And this is the kind that's cooked with cooked meringue on top. And it's a little different than just mixing up Jell-O pudding mix and milk. It does require a double boiler. You could probably make your own out of 2 saucepans, but I do have one. The only thing about the double boiler is they don't make them any larger really than this, which is, there's no size on the bottom, so I'm not really sure how many cups this holds. But we're gonna get it almost full or close to full with the ingredients we have. This recipe, I believe, was on the back of the Vanilla Wafers box, and I'm not sure if it's still on there, but this is the one that I've always used if I want to make that fancy banana pudding that everybody loves. And the way the double boiler works is you have a bottom pan that has water in it, and that water will lightly boil or simmer, and then the other pan nests into the top of it, and your ingredients are in the top and will cook there. That will keep them from burning. So if you've ever melted chocolate, it asks for a double boiler too, because that keeps the chocolate from burning while it melts. So it's kind of a slow cook method, and the pudding part will take more than 10 minutes for it to get thick. So let's get started on that. It's a cup of sugar, 2/3 of a cup of plain flour, and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And I'm just going to use my measuring spoon to mix those up. And then into that, we're going to add 6 egg yolks. And let me break these. When you do the egg yolks, get this where you can see it. So I crack the egg, I take off the top half, and then I pour the yolk back and forth between the eggshells. And that will cut off that egg white. If any of your egg yolk gets into your egg whites, it ruins them and you can't use them. So be very careful about that whenever you're separating your eggs. And we will use the egg whites for the meringue. So that's why we're separating them, is because we do need those egg whites for later. So here is 6 egg yolks. And then we have 4 cups of milk. And this is just whole milk. Trying to pour it without pouring it all over the countertop. I'm going to go ahead and mix this a little bit before I pour the rest of the milk in there, just to get everything kind of incorporated before I overflow this pan. So these ingredients are going to thicken, but they're not going to overflow my pan. They're not going to expand enough to make a huge mess. Okay. I'm going to add the rest of my milk, or as much as I can. And that's as much as I'm going to put in there. And what I'll do is I'll cook this. Normally I would have my double boiler heat the bottom pan with the water boiling already. But just so I could show you, I didn't do that ahead of time. But if you already have that water hot, it will save you some time. Okay. So I'm gonna put this on the stove, and then I'll be right back, and I will tell you how long it took for it to cook. Just so you'll have an idea, but I believe it's around 10 to 12 minutes if I'm not mistaken. All right, so the custard or filling part of the banana pudding is done, and we're going to add, after it's cooked, you add a teaspoon of vanilla. I like a lot of vanilla, so it's okay that it ran over. I'm just going to mix that in. And I thought it was going to take 10 minutes to cook. It took 20 for this to thicken. And when you cook it, you want it to get as thick as you want it to be in your pudding. It is not going to cook more or thicken as it sits, and it's not going to thicken more as you put it back in the oven to cook the meringue. So get this stirred in really good. And I did notice that it did not expand in this pot, so it will thicken, but it doesn't increase in volume. So even if it's almost all the way up to the top, you're fine. I did use a whisk to stir it while it was cooking to break up any pieces of flour, any little clumps of flour. Okay, so now we're going to layer it, and you start with just a tiny bit of custard in the bottom of your pan, just enough basically to get the bottom of the pan a little bit wet, I guess, so that the vanilla wafers will stick and stay in place. And the recipe does call for 1 box of vanilla wafers, but I can tell you from experience, I like a lot of vanilla wafers in mine, but I use a lot, so I do use more than 1 box in the recipe. But then as everybody walks by and takes a bite of vanilla wafer or gets a little snack out of the box, then you definitely need more. So that's why we get more. So once you have that first little bit of custard in there, and if you notice, you can still see the bottom of my dish. So it's just barely any in there. I'm going to cover this with vanilla wafers. But when you do this, I don't worry about how they look in here. Nobody's going to notice unless you do it in a clear dish. If I do it in a clear dish, I will stand vanilla wafers up around the edges so that you can see them, so it looks pretty. I have an audience today, that's why I'm looking over here. So I have an invisible helper who is watching my every move. But another thing with the vanilla wafers that I have noticed, and I'm not really sure what causes this because I've not done full experiments on it. I think these are store brand. These are not the name brand because it's all they had. I have only used the name brand for several years now because they don't disintegrate in the pudding like the store brand does. The name brand tends to hold up better. Normally, I let my pudding filling cool before I start layering all this. But this time, I'm not going to do that because I'm in a hurry. So now once you get the vanilla wafers down, I just slice bananas. This recipe calls for 10 bananas. So, and then we have 3 layers. So I cut up 3 1/3 bananas per layer. And it takes that much to even come close to getting this covered. And I don't worry about slicing them uniform. I don't slice them in advance. If you do, you probably need to put them in lemon juice or something, but I didn't want it to change the flavor of the banana by doing that. Okay, here's the last little bit on this layer. And then kind of spread them out evenly. Does get your hands a little bit messy. Okay, once I've done that, I need a ladle, please. You want to start spreading out more of the custard on top, so it's custard barely on the bottom, and then you put fruit, vanilla wafers, and then your bananas. And I'm going to top that with about 1/3 of my custard. And you don't want to completely cover it or you're going to be using too much of your custard. So put a third of it on there. Go back over it with the vanilla wafers. A lot of these are broken in this package. Oh, but when you're cooking the filling, the other thing I forgot to mention is you need to stand there and stir it the entire time, because otherwise it'll just get all thick on the bottom and it'll still be not quite as thick on top. Just to keep it evenly thickening and keep that heat evenly distributed. And it also keeps you right there so you can see the second that it gets to the point you want it to be. Okay, so that's my vanilla wafers. Go back over it with more bananas. Helps to have a sharp knife. Of course, bananas are easier to cut anyway. I do go ahead and peel them, but I don't slice them. And this will completely fill up a 9 by 13 dish. So if you have a deeper dish that you can use that's about the same size, that's kind of the ideal thing. And I'm telling you, people will be fighting over this, and then they'll start asking you to bring it to any event where there's food. And if you have extra, because I know the bunches of bananas, you can usually buy a couple extra bananas and have a little, if you can save a little bit of your custard and make some for your family, that way that they don't, banana pudding is not something that you make in this house and not leave some for everybody at home. My dad's that way about anything just about that my mom cooks to take somewhere. So the joke is that anytime my mom takes a cake or a dessert to church or to a family reunion, there's always a piece missing. Because my dad says he has to try it before she takes it. Okay, this is the last layer of vanilla wafers, and I've already used an entire box. Add a little bit more. It's just easier to grab them out of a bowl than out of that box. And if this looks messy, it's okay because you're going to cover it with meringue anyway, and it will be completely covered so nobody's going to see it. And then there's the big challenge or the big question of, do you like your banana pudding warm or do you like it cold? There's usually, everybody has an opinion about that. I just like banana pudding. But I would probably say when it's getting almost room temperature right after it's been cooked, that's how I like it. Okay, and then more bananas. The last layer of these. And then we'll do one more layer of custard before we make the meringue. And folks are scared of making meringue, and I don't know why. It really is simple. You need a good mixer that will beat at a high enough speed, and knowing, I guess, when to stop when they're done is key. But if you pay attention and do what I tell you to do on here, it will be easy. Okay, so let me spread out the bananas. And then we're ready for the custard. And there is nothing banana flavored. It's funny that you eat this and it tastes like banana pudding, but there is nothing banana flavored in the custard. It's just vanilla. It's just a vanilla custard. I've got one right here. I used too much of my custard on the other layers, so there's not a lot left, but it'll be fun. And this is one of those recipes that should definitely be labeled "Made with Love," because it does take a long time to make it. It's not something you're going to throw together really quick before you go somewhere, because just having that custard take 20 minutes to thicken, that's really a long time when you're standing over the stove. Okay. Now, I'm going to set this aside and we'll make the custard. The meringue. So, with the meringue, I'm going to turn the mixer on high, so it might get a little loud. And you want to mix these. They're going to turn white. There's nothing added to them. It's just egg whites. You're going to mix them. They're going to turn white eventually, but they will thicken up, and they'll get to the point that when you pull the beaters out of them, those peaks will remain, and that's what you're looking for. Some recipes will tell you until you have soft peaks, which means it will peak, but then it'll meld back down into your egg whites. These, you want soft peaks that will remain, but you don't want to get them to the point that they're dry, because the more you're just incorporating air into this. So the longer you beat them, the drier they're going to become. So once they get to that point where they're forming those firm peaks, stop messing with it. So here's what we're going to do, and I'll show you exactly what that looks like. So on this, with this recipe, we're going to add sugar to the meringue. And when you're going to add something else, you do want to beat them until those soft peaks form. Once that's happened, then you can gradually add your other ingredients until you get the firm peaks. Because if you get the firm peaks, then add other ingredients and beat it longer, it's going to be too dry. So I don't know if you can see this, it's starting to foam up and lose some of that yellowish, pale yellow color. And it does take a little while. And these are the 6 egg whites from the yolks we used earlier to make the custard. Once they get to the point that they're almost white, then you're getting close to the point that those soft peaks will be ready. Look, not quite yet. Okay. Now I am getting some peaks that are very small, so it is very hard to see them in here, but it peaks up just a little bit. So now, as with my mixer running, I'm going to beat these just a little bit. And then slowly add the sugar. And it's hard to tell with your mixer running if it's to the point you want it to be. And so turn it off, lift the beaters up out of it, and you can tell. So it's not quite ready yet. Not yet, it's getting better. Okay, we're almost there. Okay, now we're good. So we're going to spread this over the top. It does not take long for meringue to cook. It will brown and burn very fast. So you do have to keep an eye on it. Not only do I keep an eye on it, but I keep a timer set so that I don't get distracted or forget about it. Okay, so you want to gently just spoon this out. If you can see, probably can't see very well, that it maintains its shape. Can you reach that dial on the lamp under on the bottom? Try down just a little so it makes it a little down. Sorry. Maybe it's easier to see then instead of a glare. Once you have it, I kind of spread a little even dollops of it evenly over the top, because that way you don't have to mess with it as much trying to spread it around. Okay, and I do use a large tablespoon to spread this around with. I make sure it gets all the way to the edges of my dish to cover up everything that's underneath it. That's kind of the goal first before trying to make it look all pretty in the middle. And I think meringue is so pretty when it's baked. I do love the way it looks, because all those ridges will get brown and all the valleys will stay a lighter color. But you do have to let it get brown enough that you know the meringue is done, so that those egg whites are cooked. Okay. Now, once you have it completely covered, I just kind of smooth out and even my meringue. And you can kind of swirl it around and lift up some swirls, because those are really going to show up when it browns. Okay, and then I'll put this in the oven and bake it for about 15 minutes until it gets brown. It's one of those things you just have to watch because everybody's oven is different. This one is not an exact time that you can cook it and have it be okay. So I'll put it in there. When it's done, I'll bring it out and show it to you and let you see how pretty it is. So banana pudding is finished. You let it get pretty dark because it's still going to be white down in some of those deep valleys. The peaks will be more of a golden brown, and then the rest of it will just be a good medium brown. So let it get done enough because that's really important. It's gonna take a while. It did take 20 minutes for it to cook, but it's worth it, and it turns out beautiful every time.